That's naughty!
And what do you do to the naughty ones?
I give them a lump of coal.
Where is it? I gotta watch.
I believe in you.
Season's beatings, everyone. We are here to talk about Violent Night, the new action Christmas movie by director Tommy Wirkola. Now, Wirkola actually has his roots in horror. He, of course, was responsible for the two Dead Snow movies. This is where we may have got some of this kind of Nordic backstory, and certainly some of the violence that is in this movie. So what is this movie? We are talking Violent Night, a Christmas action film taking riffs from Die Hard, Home Alone and a variety of other kind of Christmas movies and literally making it what if John McClane were Santa Claus. Essentially a group of violent thieves storm a kind of large kind of mansion home to a very rich family demanding money, but it happens to be on the same night that Santa Claus is literally visiting the house, dropping off his presents and stuff, of course, on Christmas Eve. And it's up to Santa to save the residents and maybe defeat the bad guys. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So this is a 20 million budget movie, and it stars David Harbour as Santa Claus. You've got Beverly D'Angelo, of course, as Hollywood Christmas movie royalty, of course, from the Christmas Vacation movie. John Leguizamo, of course, playing one of these kind of sleazy kind of bad guys in the movie as well. So, what do we think? What do we think about this movie? So this is called Violent Night, and it certainly lives up to its name. This is a lot of fun. This is actually directed, as I say, by Tommy Wirkola, but it's also produced by David Leitch, who you may know was kind of partially responsible for the kind of the John Wick movies. And as such, it has a lot of kind of stunt work in it because that's kind of what his production company is kind of based on. Originally, it was actually going to be a Easter movie. David Harbour was going to be the Easter bunny, but he didn't want to wear the bunny suit, so it was kind of modified to be a Christmas movie, which I think was probably the smart decision. So, you know, what works in this movie? Now, this is kind of a bigger budget B movie, to be honest with you. But it's so much fun. It is so much fun, providing you go into this knowing what you're kind of getting. I feel those of you who want a real high-impact action film won't be disappointed with this one because it has absolutely bucket loads. But I gotta say, I thought it had some heart as well. Let's start with the kind of the cast here. I thought David Harbour leading off as kind of Santa Claus himself was fantastic. A really kind of like gruff, kind of like, you know, Santa Claus, but you can see the kind of like the heart of gold underneath it all. I thought he did a great performance, and you know, he was kind of believable in the action sequences, and also I think gave heart when it kind of mattered as well. I really liked his kind of relationship with this kind of little girl who he's primarily kind of trying to kind of save. Although they had some great kind of chemistry, and I quite liked our kind of bad guys as well. John Leguizamo, I think, is you know, always pretty fun to watch when he's dialed down just a little bit, and I think that's because of the case here. I quite like some of his kind of henchmen as well. I thought some of them were quite fun. So the characters, I think, for the most part, worked kind of pretty well. And it's nice to see Beverly D'Angelo as well. In regards to kind of story elements, I really enjoyed the kind of the backstory that they gave kind of Santa. Without kind of spoiling anything, I would say it kind of dates back to a Northern European kind of heritage. And I kind of quite like that peek behind the curtain, so to speak. I mean, I wish they had done more with it, but, you know, I'll come on to that. But I also have to say I really enjoyed the music and the kind of the aesthetics that went along with that. We see at one point Santa kind of tending to his wounds, and he's got all these kind of like tribal tattoos, and we get this kind of like particular kind of music that kind of plays over that scene, and again later in the movie. I thought it really kind of set up this kind of like wider universe, the Santa shared universe, shall we call it. And I also think there were some interesting plot points in regards to his backstory where he himself doesn't kind of quite fully understand the powers that he's wielding, so to speak. Now, because Tommy Wirkola, I would say, comes from a horror background, One of the things I think people overlook in when you kind of think about that is some of the kind of the violence in the movie, because yes, it's a very, very violent action film, and people have said that maybe it's too violent. But I would say the violence here is more akin to a horror film than an action film, because that's Wakola's background. So some of the kills here are kind of quite special, shall we say. Some of them are Christmas themed. Some of them kind of refer to movies like Home Alone, for example, and give a kind of realistic portrayal of what some of these kind of traps might do. And there's one particular kill here that I think is a signature chef's kiss in regards to probably will be people's favourite kill here. And that, to me, comes from more of a horror sensibility, more so than an action film. Because if you think about Die Hard and stuff, you know, the kills, you know, they're fun and violent, but they're not kind of like inventive. But that's kind of more of a horror thing. So that's definitely the kind of the influence from having a kind of a horror director here. So I do understand when people kind of liken this to a horror film, even though I would say it's more falls on a kind of an action sequence. And speaking of action, obviously because you've got David Leitch, of course, who comes from a stunt background and was partially responsible for the John Wick movies, you've got tons of actions and it's very, very well choreographed. There's extended kind of fight scenes with various kind of like implements, Christmas kind of themed paraphernalia being used as kind of weapons, and it's filmed in such a way that I think is kind of pretty effective. And it also has a little bit of commentary in regards to the kind of the state of the world, certainly in regards to as it refers to Christmas. I kind of quite enjoyed the fact that, you know, we get a little bit of commentary on how kids these days are just pretty much ungrateful and just want more. The next thing. They just want video games. They're not kind of interested in kind of the spirit of Christmas, so to speak, more of just a kind of like the commercial kind of side of stuff. That I thought was all kind of pretty fantastic. And it's a pretty quick-paced movie. I think once it kind of gets going, it kind of doesn't really let up. And yeah, there's some fun elements there. And I really like the other thing I would say before we move on to what doesn't work here is when our bad guys start to get an inkling about maybe this is Santa, how they kind of respond to it. Like it's not like it's a snap and they're kind of like, oh, it's Santa. There's this kind of slow kind of build-up of evidence. They're thinking maybe this is kind of Santa, and they're a little bit, I don't really know what to kind of do with it. That's kind of why I quite like some of the kind of the henchmen here. That was kind of quite fun. Okay, so maybe what doesn't work in this movie. I don't really have any huge criticisms, to be honest with you, of this film. But I will say this movie won't be for everyone. You know, those of you who want like an action-based Christmas movie have to go into this realising that it does really kind of like floor it when it comes to the level of kind of violence on screen. So maybe people, you have to understand it really does live up to its title of kind of Violent Night. I have seen some criticism that say that it's too violent. I don't think you can really say that's necessarily a bad point in the movie, because, you know, that's what the movie is. But it's going to be more of a taste thing. But do I have any legitimate criticisms? I think the biggest one for me maybe is some of our kind of supporting characters are somewhat kind of cartoonish. From our kind of family members, that they just seem like broad stereotypes, to some of our kind of our moments from our kind of bad guys as well. Again, they just seem somewhat kind of cartoonish with flip-flopping motivations, and, you know, played for kind of like almost like Looney Tunes kind of style sequences at some point. So there's that. I have to say, I think maybe the movie could have had a little bit more meat on the bones in regards to its story elements. So two things I'd mention here. Firstly is the kind of the backstory that we kind of given to the Santa Claus character. We see kind of what he was like before he became Santa, and I think it's a really intriguing idea. But then we don't really see the transition into what made him Santa, or kind of what happened to make him in this place. Now, I wonder if this is kept for a sequel, perhaps, but actually watching this film as a standalone film, you know, you can't help but think, I'm kind of interested in regards to the transition. And we see a very kind of different kind of style of character when we see these kind of flashbacks, and they're thinking, well, how did you go from point A to point B? They're vastly different. So I maybe would have had a scene at the beginning, kind of showing that, maybe without context before you kind of really understand what it refers to later on in the movie. Now, I've mentioned also that I think this movie has this commentary in regards to the state of the entitlement of young people. And I liked that, but I think they could have done more with that. I think it was just added as a little bit of kind of throwaway commentary at the beginning of the movie where Santa's in a bar kind of discussing how he kind of feels like, you know, he's had enough of this, he's too old for this shit and all that kind of thing. And it was an interesting sequence, and obviously it has, you know, you can relate it to today's kind of like kids and stuff. But I think they could have had more examples of that, or things kind of going through as the kind of the film progresses. We get a little bit with a kind of like this young lad who's at the house, but again, it was an interesting element that I think could have been kind of expanded upon. So, you know, there's a few elements here that I think could have kind of plus the movie. To be quite honest with you, you know. It's maybe some people might find it a little bit mean. There are kind of characters that get kind of killed brutally. And I have to say, again, maybe the setup wasn't super good because we see this kind of like this big house that Beverly D'Angelo's character is the kind of the matriarch of. But we have all of these people, all these kind of innocent people, when they kind of are sort of terrorist group kind of come in, they kind of kill and think, well, who are these people? I mean, we get a throwaway on the staff, but there seems to be absolutely kind of loads of them. And thinking, you know, who are these people? I think it needed, again, a little bit more establishing as to the setup of kind of Beverly D'Angelo's kind of legacy, because I was thinking all these kind of random people are getting killed, and I have no idea what they're actually doing in this house on kind of Christmas Eve. Maybe they could have made her a senator or something like that so you would understand, but that she just seems to be a owner of a company, you know. And it's not like she was having this big party or something on Christmas Eve. It's just her and her family thinking, what are all these other people for? Again, it just kind of skips over that a little bit. And maybe that's because, again, the producer comes from a stunt background, more interested in kind of the action sequences and stuff like that, rather than kind of like, you know, the kind of the setup and things like this. So narratively, although I wouldn't say this movie is, you know, you can't kind of watch it in regards to its narrative, it just is a little bit weaker on some elements in the movie to kind of flesh out the kind of the world, so to speak. But, you know, if you just want to watch this for a balls to the wall, you know, B-movie action film with tons of kind of like, violence and kind of cool kills and kind of fight sequences that are very kind of well shot, then obviously you would you know, you would enjoy this one. And it's got a lot of heart in it as well. It surprisingly it doesn't feel shallow in regards to its kind of like its emotional kind of punch. Overall, I really enjoyed it, I have to say. You know, missing a few bits here and there, but nothing that I think derails this movie. Just a kind of like a couple of kind of missed opportunities. But I would like to see more of this. I would like to see, you know, certainly a sequel or a prequel or something along the lines of that. So for me, it's a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. And be good or you'll be on the naughty list.